Hello from Mrs. Rania Al-Safadi, English for Palestine, 10th grade. Do you remember these characters? What will happen after Passepartout's two mistakes? Open your student books, page 44. Oh, what's this? Fire? What was happening there? Let's watch episode 3, Saving Aouda.
The train from Bombay to Calcutta set out punctually at 8 p.m. Among the passengers, to Mr. Fogg's delight, was Sir Francis Cromarty, a fellow whist player from the Mongolia. Sir Francis had made India his home and was returning after a trip to England. He asked to sit with Mr. Fogg, and they quickly fell into friendly conversation. Sir Francis had never seen Mr. Fogg take in the sights during the boat voyage.
Sir Francis,
said Mr. Fogg quietly,
we'll look around for some transport to Allahabad. Mr. Fogg, this delay is to your disadvantage,
said Sir Francis.
No, Sir Francis, it was foreseen,
replied Fogg.
What?
Cried Sir Francis.
You knew that the railway... Not at all,
said Mr. Fogg.
Attempting to rescue the young widow would be a bold undertaking, maybe even an impossible one. But Mr. Fogg did not hesitate, and Sir Francis was an enthusiastic ally. Passepartout was ready for anything, and even the guide was on their side.
Where are they taking her?
Asked Mr. Fogg.
To the pagoda of Pelagi, 2 miles from here,
said the guide.
The woman will spend the night there, and the sacrifice will take place at the first light of dawn.
The guide looked at the group of rescuers.
It is certain that we shall risk not only our lives, but horrible tortures if we are caught. That is foreseen,
said Mr. Fogg.
I think we must wait until night before acting.
I agree,
said Sir Francis. Their guide gave an account of the woman.
She is the daughter of a wealthy Bombay merchant and received an excellent English education. Her name is Aouda. While still very young, she was left an orphan and was married against her will to an old Raja. When he died, she escaped, knowing the fate that awaited her. But she was captured. That is why she is under such heavy guard now.
The guide's story strengthened the determination of Mr. Fogg and his friends. As soon as night fell, the guide led them deeper into the thick jungle. They came to an area lit by torches. A group of Indians were sleeping outside a wide brick wall that enclosed the tall pagoda. Guards with swords marched back and forth before the doors. The rescuers hid themselves and waited, hoping the guards would fall asleep. After midnight, when it was clear that the guards were going to patrol all night, Fogg and his companions sneaked around to the back of the pagoda. With 2 sturdy knives that their guide had brought, Mr. Fogg and Sir Francis worked quietly at the loose bricks of the wall. They managed to dislodge a few, and then found they could remove the other bricks with their hands. Their plan was to open a hole large enough for Aouda to slip through. Suddenly, a cry arose from inside the pagoda. Mr. Fogg and his friends escaped into the jungle just as the guards ran to the back of the pagoda. Sir Francis shook his fists, Passepartout was furious, and the guide grimaced with rage. How could they save Aouda now? The tranquil Mr. Fogg waited, revealing no emotion.
We can do nothing but go on our way,
whispered Sir Francis.
He is right. We must go,
said the guide.
Stop,
said Fogg.
I'm not due at Allahabad before noon tomorrow. We may get another chance to rescue her.
What is this cool Englishman thinking?
Sir Francis wondered.
Is she planning to boldly snatch the woman from her executioners at the very moment of the sacrifice?
It was hard to believe that the calm Phileas Fogg could attempt something so desperate. They crept around the outskirts of the clearing and made their way back to the doors of the pagoda. Concealed by the jungle, Fogg and his companions watched through the night. Passepartout climbed into the branches of a tree. While he was perched there, an idea struck him, and the more he considered it, the more firmly it lodged in his brain. The lengthening shadows announced the approach of day, and the Indians sleeping outside the pagoda woke up. Tambourines sounded and chanting began. The hour of the sacrifice had come. The doors of the pagoda swung open. Aouda was let out, struggling in the clutches of two large guards. Sir Francis' heart throbbed, and he seized Mr. Fogg's hand. He was surprised to discover that Mr. Fogg's hand gripped a knife tightly. Phileas Fogg and his companions mingled at the back of the crowd as the funeral procession made its way to a stream. On the bank of the stream, the body of the Rajah who had been Aouda's husband lay on a large pile of carefully stacked wood. From the back of the crowd, Mr. Fogg saw Aouda. She was lying senseless beside her dead husband at the top of the funeral pyre. The Brahmin leader brought a torch. The wood was heavily soaked in oil and instantly caught on fire. Phileas Fogg let out a desperate moan, and Sir Francis and the guide seized him before he could rush onto the climbing flames. He pushed them aside and stepped to the front of the crowd. Just then, a cry of terror arose. The old Rajah was not dead. He stood, took his wife in his arms, and amidst a cloud of smoke, descended from the pyre. Mr. Fogg and Sir Francis stood in shock. The guide bowed his head, and all the Brahmins kneeled with their faces to the ground. To Mr. Fogg's amazement, the Rajah who had returned from the dead walked directly up to him.
Let us be off,
he said. But it wasn't the Rajah at all. It was Passepartout. Without losing a moment, the four men disappeared into the jungle with Aouda. They returned to the elephant, and thanks to their skillful guide, escaped quickly. For the first hour, Passepartout laughed happily at his success. Sir Francis shook his hand heartily. Fogg said simply,
Well done.
which from him was high praise indeed. Wrapped in a traveling blanket, Aouda rested on Keone's back until they reached the train station at Allahabad. It was 10 o'clock, and the journey to Calcutta would take 24 hours. They would have just enough time to catch the steamer for Hong Kong on October 25 at noon. Passepartout was sent to purchase some necessities for Aouda, including a dress and a shawl. While he was away, Mr. Fogg and Sir Francis helped Aouda to a waiting room in the station. They watched her anxiously, waiting for her to revive from her long slumber. Passepartout returned a little before the train was about to leave. Outside the station, Mr. Fogg was paying the guide, who stood with Keone.
You've been a great help.
He was saying,
I have paid you for your service, but not for your devotion. Would you like to have this elephant? He's yours.
The guide's eyes glistened.
You are giving me a fortune,
he cried. Mr. Fogg and his friends then boarded the train. Keone trumpeted goodbye, and the guide waved as the train left the station. Phileas Fogg, Sir Francis Cromarty, Passepartout, and Aouda were soon seated in their car, traveling at full speed. It took 2 hours to reach the train's first stop at Benares, and during the journey, Aouda fully recovered from her drowsiness. She was astonished to find herself in a car on a train, dressed in European clothing and surrounded by strangers. Her companions immediately told her what had transpired. With tears in her eyes, she thanked her saviors repeatedly. She knew, however, that her husband's family would not stop searching for her. Danger would follow her as long as she remained in India. When she explained that she had a merchant relative in Hong Kong, Mr. Fogg offered to escort her there safely. At 12:30, the train arrived in Benares. This was Sir Francis' destination. He wished them all success on their journey and said goodbye. From Benares, the train passed through the valley of the Ganges River. The travelers could see mountains, fields of barley, wheat, and corn, and jungles with green alligators. They passed villages at the edges of thick forests and elephants bathing in sacred rivers. Night fell and the train continued at full speed. In the dark, the passengers heard the roars of tigers, bears, and wolves, which fled at the sound of the locomotive. The train reached Calcutta at 7 in the morning on October 25. According to Mr. Fogg's journal, that was the exact date scheduled for his arrival. He was neither behind nor ahead of time. The 2 days he had gained between London and Bombay had been lost in the journey across India. But Phileas Fogg did not regret the loss in the least. The train entered the station, and Passepartout jumped out first. Mr. Fogg followed and held out his arm to help his fair companion down from the train. Mr. Fogg intended to proceed at once to the Hong Kong steamer so that Aouda could get comfortably settled for the voyage. He was unwilling to leave her side while she remained on dangerous ground.
What is the next surprise? What do you think? We'll know the answer in episode 4 next time. Just stay close. I hope you enjoy. Thank you for watching and see you next video.